Hey everybody, it's Kevra. That's me, I'm Kevra, and people say that Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom aren't actually Zelda games. You know, I've seen a lot of people say some weird stuff on the internet, but this has gotta be one of the strangest. I mean, these games are literally called The Legend of Zelda, and you're gonna sit there and tell me with a straight face that these aren't actual Zelda games. Now, if it was something like Cadence of Hyrule, that I'm on board with, that makes a lot of sense to me. It's not an actual Zelda game, it's literally called Cadence of Hyrule. Same thing with Hyrule Warriors. Especially that first one feels like a fan game. But the second one, you know, considering how closely they worked with the Zelda team, I would consider it a Zelda game, but I get where you're coming from. It's not the same gameplay, it's not made by the same developers, just like the CDI games, which are also not called The Legend of Zelda, they're just called Zelda. But Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are literally called The Legend of Zelda, just like every single other Zelda game, aside from Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. But even Miyamoto says he kind of regrets that one because he realized he made the difficulty too hard for that game. So yeah, it's literally called The Legend of Zelda. It's literally made by the same company who's been making these games since the 1980s. It's not like they gave it off to a third-party developer or just sold off the IP, it's the same people. And then when I argue that, some people will still stick to the guns, and then other people will say, oh, well, that's not what I meant. What I truly meant was that it's not a traditional Zelda game. There's a lot to unpack here. First of all, these are the games that have come the closest to the original Legend of Zelda game. You can go and find interviews where they have said that the first game was their inspiration when making Breath of the Wild, and they even used some of the game mechanics, the graphics, and all that kind of stuff to map out Breath of the Wild. The first game was literally open world before people even knew what an open world game was. And then I'll hear some people say, well, Ocarina of Time is open world too, if you really think about it. Oh, look at you with your bullshit excuse that makes absolutely no sense. In Ocarina of Time, you can't just do whatever you want. You literally have to go to an area, progress a certain amount, then stop what you're doing, backtrack, and then you can go to the next area by skipping out on the very end of the previous area you were. It's not the same, no. If you've ever said that, you go to the corner, you stay there for a while after that comment. And then some people will just say, well, the original Legend of Zelda game doesn't actually count. That was just like the foundation, that was like them figuring it out. But when Ocarina of Time came around, that's what really established the franchise, and they've been doing that ever since. Yeah, and they kept doing it for 20 years, which is why it was time to evolve again, because it had been 20 years. And I think that's the thing that bugs me the most, is the people who champion this so-called traditional Zelda. Like, they love that it evolved from the original Legend of Zelda into what 3D Zelda became, but they really don't like that the evolution happened again. And this is just so bizarre to me, because the same people who championed evolution and realized that they couldn't do the exact same top-down 2D Zelda that they had started with are now saying that they don't like evolution, they don't like change. It's like they're claiming that video games were perfected in the 90s and then we should just never let go of that. Meanwhile, I've been waiting for this evolution, this change. I've been playing Zelda since the 90s, and while I do enjoy almost all of the games, I remember specifically playing Skyward Sword and wondering why this franchise just absolutely refused to evolve and become more modernized. I was literally wandering through Lanayru Desert, wondering why Skyward Sword felt like every other 3D Zelda game I had played before then, but just with the addition of motion controls. I mean, I think the big modern feature that they added in Skyward Sword was the fact that we could dash. We didn't have to roll around like a jackass anymore. Of course, that being said, I know that when something is unfamiliar, usually it's unwelcome, maybe a little bit scary, and the first time I started playing Breath of the Wild, I kind of had a negative reaction. Although I think a big part of why I hated it so much was just because I hated the new Nintendo Switch controller. I eventually got used to it, but starting off with this weird square box controller and these tiny little joysticks, I was really not enjoying that at first. And it was the first time I bought a Nintendo system where I was like, I can't believe I bought this day one. This was just a waste of money. That plus I was still doing the tutorial, so I was still figuring out exactly what the game was, what I was supposed to be doing, all the changes that they had made, and it was just this weird ball of like, I was just not enjoying it. There wasn't really much of a story yet, or at all, but that's a different rant for a different video. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know how to survive in the cold. My character was super weak. They were throwing all these new abilities at me that I was still just learning how to do. And so far, there was only one other character outside of Zelda talking in my head. I was worried that the entire game was gonna be just me wandering around the woods, not really seeing anybody, cause like everybody's, I guess, dead because of what happened, and the Hyrule Castle's been taken over, and there's no signs of civilization anywhere. I knew where I was supposed to go, but I didn't know how to get there. I was trying to climb up mountain walls that I couldn't do because I didn't have enough stamina. And I was so used to just having my hand held where, you know, you start in a village and you talk to all these people and you figure out what's going on little by little, and it feels like overly excessive. It's like, yeah, come on, I know how to swing my sword. Or they'll show you exactly where you need to go, like they'll zoom in on it slowly, like, yeah, I can see it. You just pointed to it, like, I don't need a slow zoom in. But this, I'm like, where's my slow zoom ins? How am I supposed to get over there? You just made me zoom in on my, like, with my little telescope thing. I don't know, what's going on? So yeah, I hated it. I remember like the next day telling people like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is the worst Zelda game. Like, I don't know why, like, I can't believe I stood in line to get a Switch last night just to get this freaking game. And then I finally completed the tutorial. I had completed the 4 shrines, I went back to the Temple of Time, and that's when the story started to unfold, kind of, and they were like, here's your paraglider. Just go wherever. And I did. And that's when I started to realize what this game is and when I started falling in love with it. Like, when I was still on the Great Plateau, I just kind of assumed that the shrines were essentially just my training grounds, and they were, but whenever I dropped down to the mainland and I was like, oh, there's another shrine. There's another shrine. Like, and I started realizing that this kind of was the game. And unlike the Great Plateau, where it's like, there's 4 specific ones you need to go to, and then something will happen. It'll be like, no, just go wherever you want. You see one, you go to it, or mark it and then go back to it later. And I was addicted because it was such fun exploration. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but I didn't mind because it was so fun to discover all these new things across this entire map. And yeah, that's very different than the traditional Zelda games. But at the same time, it's so much better because the traditional stuff is still there. Like, there's still a Zora's Domain to go to. There's still a Death Mountain you can go to, but you don't have to go there right away. There's so much in between those places, which makes the entire map kind of like a dungeon, which is exactly what they were going for. I didn't realize it up until they literally said that in an interview, and I was like, oh yeah, no, it does feel like that, because I'm trying to figure out exactly where I'm gonna go, how I'm gonna get there. Like, the map itself is a puzzle. And then the shrines are essentially just like these rooms within this massive world dungeon. Which, to me, and I know this might be an unpopular opinion, but I actually like the shrines a lot more than the actual dungeons from previous Zelda games. Now, don't get me wrong, I do still like traditional dungeons, but at the same time, they had gotten really, really stale by the time we got to Skyward Sword. I mean, how many more times are we gonna do okay, you're gonna go through half of this dungeon, and then you're gonna get the really big item of the dungeon, and you're gonna use that item for the rest of the dungeon, to beat the boss, and then that's it. Especially when they kept having the same big item over and over again. It's like, da-na-na-na, you got the bombs. For the 20th game in a row. Wow, now I can finally blow up walls that I've been wanting to since the beginning of the game. Like, I didn't want to do yet another dungeon that was halfway based around the hook shot. I've already done that dungeon a million times. But these shrines didn't have that same problem. You know, the great thing about Breath of the Wild is you don't have to wait to get the tools throughout the entire game. After you complete the tutorial, you have everything you need. There is never a single time where you have to backtrack and go, you have to mentally remember, oh, there's a crack in that wall, but I don't have the bombs yet. I have to come back here. It's gonna be a pain in the ass. No, you have everything up front, and I freaking love that. Now, I do understand the argument of, well, I like to get it slowly bit by bit because then I feel like I'm progressing throughout the game. And I get that. I think that's fair. I still vastly prefer getting everything that we need up front. But technically, you did still progress and get abilities throughout Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. In Breath of the Wild, whenever you beat one of the divine beasts, you got a champion's ability. In Tears of the Kingdom, whenever you beat one of their temples, you got a sage's ability. And Tears of the Kingdom even kind of replicated the old dungeons because they would give you that ability at the beginning of the dungeon so you could use it throughout that entire dungeon. That being said, I will say that most of the abilities pretty much sucked. But at the same time, I do like at least the fact that it was something you didn't have to progress while exploring the actual world. Like again, there was no moment where, oh crap, I couldn't get this Korok seed because I don't have this ability yet. Or, oh no, I can't get behind this cracked wall to the shrine that I need to get to because I don't have bombs yet. So yeah, I get that it's different, but again, anyone who just says it's not like Zelda at all, I think is just absolutely lying to themselves, because it's very clearly an evolution of Zelda. It's still puzzle solving. You still need certain tools to solve certain puzzles. You still go to a town that's having some sort of problem, and then you fix their problem, usually by completing some form of temple. You're still collecting heart pieces, but now instead of 4 broken shards of a heart, it's just little balls of orbs that you get from solving puzzles. And technically that's exactly how you would always get a heart piece in the old games. You would have to solve some sort of puzzle. The only difference is the puzzle would be out in the actual world as opposed to, far beneath the world's surface in some sort of shrine. But it's still puzzle solving. Now, if you think the puzzles were just too easy in these games, that I can kind of understand. I will say, because there are so many shrines within each of these games, there are definitely ones that are a lot easier than others. But we also have to admit to ourselves, there's also a lot of easy puzzles in the earlier games, especially in the early levels. And we also have to admit that, we played the traditional Zelda games when we were smaller children, and small children are stupid. So of course, from the viewpoint of your stupid child mind, the puzzles you played in Ocarina of Time or Twilight Princess seemed really difficult because you were a stupid child. But now that you're older, and we'll say a little bit smarter, but if you're still claiming that these aren't real Zelda games, I don't know exactly how much smarter, but we'll say you're at least a little bit smarter. On top of the fact that you have been solving similar puzzles ever since you were a child for I don't know how many years. For me, it's been almost 30. And these games have almost always been rated E for everyone. They have been trying to garner towards, kids, adults, teenagers, people of all ages. And so of course, they're not gonna make it too difficult. So yeah, I get where people are saying of this is not a traditional Zelda game, but those people really need to admit that this is a Zelda game. It just looks a little bit different than what they're used to. It's not a completely changed formula, it's taken on a different form. We still get a bunch of tools to solve puzzles, but now we get them at the beginning of the game as opposed to throughout the game. We're still getting dungeons, but the world map itself is now a dungeon with a bunch of other little mini dungeons scattered throughout the entire land. And then your bigger dungeons look a little bit different because you're not getting some sort of tool that you can use throughout the rest of the land, because that would really undercut the game if they did that. And I'll also say for the Divine Beasts and the Tears of the Kingdom temples, they are a little bit repetitive of you gotta go and unlock these 4 sectors or whatever. That is a little bit different. I'm not a big fan of that. I will say that when it comes to these temples, these big temples, it should be a little bit more like the traditional dungeon where you go from room to room to room. It's not about like an open world dungeon where you're going around to all this place where everything's basically unlocked to a certain degree already, and you're just trying to unlock these 4 points. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of that. In fact, I think that's one of the reasons why I like the shrines better, is because the shrines, they'll have you put in this like itty bitty room, and then you solve the puzzle and you can go to the next room. And then sometimes when you complete that second room, and then there's a third room you need to complete, and then you're finally done with the shrine. But still, I feel like that's kind of a nitpick type of thing, where, again, for the big dungeons, we are still puzzle solving, it's just not presented in the form that we're used to. So to say they're not real dungeons, or that this is not a real Zelda game because of that, is just kind of crazy. Again, this is still the same gameplay you have been doing for years and years in other Zelda games. It's just a little bit different. And that's not to say that you're not allowed to dislike the differences. I mean, there's plenty of things I do not like about these new games, for sure. While I absolutely love open world gameplay for Zelda, I think doing it with the story is absolutely stupid. I typically love to 100% Zelda games, but they introduced way too many Korok seeds. Like, there's a ridiculous amount of Korok seeds. I'm not doing that, no. But again, the Collectathon is not something new, it's just been changed. You go back to Twilight Princess, you're collecting bugs. You go back to Minish Cap, you're collecting those little shards. The only difference here is that they just increased it by a shit ton, and it smells a little funny. And then I also just really can't take these people seriously because when Echoes of Wisdom came out, a top-down Zelda that was very much more like the traditional Zelda games that they had been begging for, they were like, yeah, still not traditional enough. They would make excuses like, oh, it's just too creative. Like, you can solve a puzzle in any way you want instead of doing it a very specific sort of way. I want to be limited with my puzzle solving. I want one specific item that does one specific task. That's exactly how I want to solve puzzles. Or you didn't like how, you could go to this town instead of this town first, or this town instead of that town first, which it really doesn't matter if there's a specific order or not. I really don't understand that complaint. I mean, for story purposes, I get it, but I feel like it's not the story that you're really complaining about, it's the gameplay that you're complaining about, and I just don't see the problem with that in the gameplay. Now, the one complaint I will give them is, yeah, you're playing as Zelda, you're not a swordsman, you're not fighting the same way Link would, so that's a legitimate one. I will give that to you. But everything else, it felt so much like a traditional Zelda game. And people said it was still too different. I admit it is a little bit different, but come on, it is very close. And again, that's my big problem with these people, is the fact that they're really just acting like it is a completely different franchise now, that it is no way, shape, or form anything like what it used to be, and that's just not even remotely true. It is very similar to how it used to be. Again, it's just the evolved form. I completely get if you don't like the storytelling. I even understand that you don't like shrines, all these little dungeons scattered throughout the entire Hyrule. I get that you don't like things, but then don't just go around and be like, well, it's not a real Zelda game just because you don't like the new form. Despite the fact that I liked Skyward Sword and Twilight Princess, I could have easily said, yeah, I don't really like the games as much anymore because they've gotten stale, so they're not real Zelda games because they're just repeating what other Zelda games have done before it. So because they're not unique and creative, like they used to be innovative and stuff, now they're just, not even Zelda games. That's what you sound like, and you need to stop. Say you don't like the games, say the reasons why you don't like the games, but don't sit there and pretend like it's not a Zelda game. All that being said, you don't have to like these games. Like, I'm not a big fan of Tears of the Kingdom, personally, but I still acknowledge it as a Legend of Zelda game. But what do you guys think? Do you think they're not Zelda games? If so, comment down below and I will battle you. I will reply back and we will go at it like Pokemon, okay? Like and subscribe and all that kind of stuff, and until next time, I will catch you guys later.